The snow came down in sheets, wild and relentless, as if the sky itself had cracked open and poured its fury over Timberline Ridge. Wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the dense evergreens and hurling sharp, frozen crystals sideways across the mountainside. Somewhere in the vast white expanse, two small figures stumbled through the storm, one carrying the other, both fighting the creeping numbness that crawled up their limbs. Avery Dawson's legs burned as she trudged forward, her boots sinking into the knee-deep snowdrifts with every desperate step. Her jacket, damp and heavy, clung to her frame, the icy wind slicing through the soaked fabric like glass. She kept her chin tucked low, her auburn hair plastered to her cheeks beneath a knit beanie, her breath fogging the air in short, labored bursts. But none of that mattered. Not the burning in her muscles, not the biting cold that gnawed at her exposed skin. All that mattered was the frail, trembling body clutched tightly against her chest. Sadie. Her little sister's face was pale, lips tinged a dangerous shade of blue, golden curls plastered to her forehead with snowmelt. She hadn't spoken in what felt like hours, her breaths shallow, eyes fluttering open only to roll shut again moments later. The wool blanket wrapped around her was soaked through, useless now, and Avery's heart clenched with every sluggish rise and fall of her sister's chest. They never should have left the car, but staying put hadn't been an option. Their mom had gone for help hours ago, promising she'd be back, but the storm had worsened, the snow piling high enough to nearly bury the vehicle. The temperature was plummeting fast, and Sadie's body couldn't take it, not with her heart condition, not out here in the middle of nowhere. Avery's eyes scanned the storm-blurred landscape, searching for anything. Shelter, a tree hollow, a rocky outcrop, something to block the wind and buy them time. Her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached, but she kept moving, driven by sheer instinct and a gnawing fear that if she stopped, Sadie wouldn't make it. That's when she saw it, barely visible through the swirling snow, a jagged opening in the side of the slope. A shallow cave, just big enough to crawl inside. Relief flooded her limbs, weak and fleeting, but it pushed her forward. The cave reeked of damp earth and old pine needles, but it was dry, shielded from the wind. Avery collapsed onto the ground, adjusting Sadie in her arms, pressing her sister's frozen body close to her own, hoping her remaining body heat would be enough to stave off the worst of the cold. "Stay with me, Bug," she whispered, voice raw, lips cracked from the wind. Her fingers shook as she peeled off the layers of her own coat, wrapping them around Sadie's tiny frame, ignoring the way the cold bit into her own skin in the process. The silence inside the cave was thick, broken only by the faint whimper of the storm outside and the ragged, uneven breaths from the little girl tucked against her. Ivory's throat burned with the weight of fear pressing against it. Her mind kept drifting to their mom, to the way her hands had trembled when she zipped Sadie's jacket, to the panic masked beneath the steady voice as she promised she'd come back soon. That had been before the storm doubled down, before the sky turned to ash and ice, before hope seemed to vanish with the fading daylight. Avery curled herself tighter around Sadie, trying to focus, trying to breathe, willing herself to stay awake. She reached for anything, memories, stories, fragments of warmth, something to keep them tethered to this moment, to remind herself they weren't done yet. Her fingers brushed against the uneven surface of the cave floor, rough with scattered pebbles and brittle pine needles. And there, beneath the debris, something small and hard pressed against her palm. She fumbled for it, her numb fingers curling around the object. It was round, metal, cold as ice. A button, weathered and worn, the faint etching of initials barely visible beneath layers of grime. J.W. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She turned the button over, squinting at the faded letters, her pulse quickening. James Whitaker. She recognized the name. A reporter who had vanished 5 years ago, last seen investigating the mining accidents on Timberline Ridge. Rumors swirled in Maple Hollow about his disappearance. Some said he got too close to the truth. Others whispered he never left these mountains at all. The storm howled outside, battering the cave entrance, but inside, a different chill settled over Avery's spine. Part fear, part curiosity, part raw survival instinct. She pressed the button into her coat pocket and leaned down, brushing damp curls from Sadie's forehead. The girl stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering, but her body remained limp, frighteningly cold against Avery's chest. She pressed the button into her coat pocket and leaned down, brushing damp curls from Sadie's forehead. The girl stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering, but her body remained limp, frighteningly cold against Avery's chest. "We're okay," Avery murmured, though the words cracked under the weight of their lie. She wasn't sure how much longer they could last here, not with the storm building, not with Sadie slipping further into unconsciousness. The wind shrieked through the trees, rattling branches like bones. Avery held her sister tighter, her gaze fixed on the cave entrance, her mind racing. She didn't believe in signs, not really, but that button, the name etched in faded silver, the timing. It all felt like more than coincidence. Somewhere, buried beneath the snow, the mountain held its secrets. And tonight, trapped beneath the storm, Avery Dawson vowed they weren't going to be one of them. Not yet. The storm coiled over Maple Hollow like a living thing, swallowing the narrow streets and pine-covered hills beneath a thick curtain of snow. Wind slammed against the frosted windows of the sheriff's station, rattling the old glass panes with every angry gust. Inside, the air was quiet. Too quiet for Deputy Ethan Grayson's liking. The hum of the overhead lights, the occasional creak of wood contracting in the cold, the faint whir of the heater struggling against the chill. Those were the only sounds keeping him tethered to the moment. He sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the glowing monitor in front of him, a faint red blip flickering in the corner of the screen. A distress signal, weak and fragmented, pinged off the radio tower near Blackthorn Ridge. It wasn't much, barely more than static, but it was enough to stir the weight in his gut. Enough to make his pulse slow and his jaw tighten. Behind him, Sergeant Tom Keegan sipped coffee that looked more like sludge, his stocky frame leaning against the counter. The lines around his eyes were carved deep from years of patrols, and winters just like this one. But even he looked uneasy as the blizzard clawed at the walls outside. "Could be a false alarm," Keegan muttered, steam rising from his chipped thermos as he spoke. "Storm this bad? Cell towers glitch all the time. Probably a lost signal from hours ago." Ethan didn't look away from the monitor. His jaw flexed, the faint scar that ran along his jawline pulling tight beneath his skin. A reminder of the last time he'd trusted a quiet night, the last time he'd ignored his instincts. 2 winters ago. The explosion at the old sawmill. Diesel, his partner, his friend, rushing into the smoke, only for the building to collapse beneath a wall of fire and twisted steel. They never found his body, just ash, rubble, and a silence that settled over Ethan like a second skin. Since then, he'd worked mostly alone, until Atlas. The dog lay curled near the door, a dark silhouette against the scuffed linoleum floor. His coat was a sharp mix of charcoal and silver, muscle rippling beneath sleek fur, eyes bright with an unnerving intelligence. 7 years old, trained for patrol, tracking and search and rescue, but with a history that made most handlers steer clear. Too reactive, they said, too intense. dangerous in the wrong hands. But Ethan recognized that edge, the barely leashed tension, the ghost of loss buried deep behind those amber eyes. They were both carrying wounds the snow hadn't touched. Atlas lifted his head, ears pricking, nose twitching faintly as if catching something on the wind that no one else could sense. His gaze shifted to the desk, to the monitor, to the pulsing red dot in the corner of the screen. His body stiffened, tail curling low, muscles locked in readiness. Ethan stood, pulling his jacket from the hook, the heavy canvas worn at the cuffs, badge stitched over the chest. "Where are you going?" Keegan asked, brow creasing as he set down his thermos. "Checking the ridge," Ethan replied, grabbing his emergency pack, thermal blankets, glucose gel, flares, everything protocol demanded and then some. Keegan's sigh filled the small room. "Weather's turning worse by the hour. Protocol says we wait for daylight. Protocol doesn't freeze to death in a ditch." Ethan shot back, slipping his arms into the jacket, fingers tightening over the zipper as the weight of his words settled between them. Atlas was already on his feet, tail low but steady, his gaze never leaving Ethan's face. The old map of Timberline Ridge sat rolled on the filing cabinet near the door. A relic from search parties past, edges curling with age, marked with faded trails, forgotten cabins, logging roads barely visible beneath years of ink and erasure. Ethan unrolled it, fingers ghosting over the worn creases. His eyes caught the faint smudge near Blackthorn Ridge, a note scribbled in faint pencil. Whitaker. Last known location. James Whitaker. The name dragged something sharp through Ethan's chest. A memory of headlines, of missing persons reports, of whispered accusations about Mercer Mining Corp., the company that practically owned half the county and most of the mountain. Whitaker had gone digging for truth and never resurfaced. And now, in the heart of another storm, a weak distress signal pulsing from the same unforgiving stretch of wilderness where James had vanished. Atlas shifted beside him, a low whine curling from the back of his throat, his gaze locked on the old map, nostrils flaring as if the paper itself held a scent. The dog wasn't just trained, he was wired different, sharp, instinctual, more attuned than any animal Ethan had worked with, and God knows he'd worked with enough to recognize when one was sensing something unseen. Ethan folded the map and shoved it into his pack. "You sure about this?" Keegan asked, though his voice already held resignation. Ethan's eyes hardened. "Number, but I'm going." The cruiser's engine groaned to life, tires crunching over fresh snow as Ethan eased onto the narrow mountain road, headlights cutting a weak path through the swirling white. The storm clawed at the windshield, and for a moment the world beyond the glass dissolved into nothing but ice and shadow. Atlas sat poised in the passenger seat, his posture rigid, ears perked, gaze pinned to the dark horizon, as if waiting for the mountain to reveal its secrets. Ethan's grip tightened over the wheel, knuckles whitening beneath his gloves. The past wasn't finished with him, and neither was the mountain. The cave walls pressed in around Avery Dawson, the stale air thick with damp and the faint metallic scent of fear. Her arms ached from holding Sadie so tightly, her fingers stiff from cold, her breath ragged against the hollow silence. Outside, the storm raged on, tearing through the pines like a freight train, whipping snow sideways across the narrow mouth of their shelter. The world beyond that small pocket of rock and shadows had become an endless blur of white and wind, a wasteland of ice that stretched on without mercy. She could feel Sadie slipping further away, the small girl's body frighteningly still. Her lips cracked and blue, her breathing shallow and faint. Every second dragged heavier, like time itself was conspiring against them. Avery pressed her cheek to Sadie's temple, whispering fragments of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "It's gonna be okay. You hear me? We're okay," she murmured, though her voice trembled with the lie. Her eyes darted toward the cave entrance, heart pounding with a sick dread that no one was coming, that her mom was lost somewhere out there too, that the mountain would swallow them whole, and the world would keep turning without even noticing they were gone. A low sound cut through the wind, a bark, sharp, deliberate. Not the distant wail of an animal lost to the storm, but something purposeful, focused. Avery's body tensed. Her pulse quickened. Another bark, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots over packed snow. The shadows at the cave's mouth shifted, and for one terrifying second her heart slammed against her ribs, convinced it was someone dangerous, something worse than the storm. But it wasn't. A figure stepped into view, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy-duty navy parka dusted in snow, a flashlight slung low in one hand, the other resting cautiously near his belt. The badge sewn over his chest gleamed faintly in the dim light, and beneath his snow goggles, sharp blue eyes scanned the cave's interior with quiet calculation. Beside him moved a German shepherd, sleek, muscular, fur slick with melting snow, sharp amber eyes glowing like molten glass in the low light. The dog padded forward with eerie calm, head lowered, nostrils flaring as he approached. The officer knelt a few feet away, his gaze catching on Avery, on the crumpled form of Sadie in her arms, his expression shifting from guarded caution to something grimmer. "I'm Deputy Ethan Grayson." His voice was low, steady, slicing through the storm like steel. "We picked up a distress signal. This your doing?" Avery's throat was dry, her lips numb. Words barely formed as she tried to respond. Before she could speak, Sadie stirred faintly, her small hand twitching against Avery's coat, a fragile sound slipping from her lips. The dog, Atlas by the embroidered patch on his vest, moved in closer, tail low, ears tilted forward, his nose brushing gently against Sadie's cheek. The reaction was immediate. Sadie's breathing hitched, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of color returned to her pale face. "She's hypothermic," Ethan observed, already unzipping his pack, pulling out thermal blankets, energy gels, water packs with a methodical efficiency born from years of emergencies just like this. Avery's hands shook as she adjusted Sadie, allowing Ethan to wrap the little girl in layers of insulated fabric. She watched the dog, Atlas, with guarded curiosity, noting the scars hidden beneath the thick fur, the way his body tensed and relaxed with uncanny precision. There was something in his eyes that unsettled her. Not aggression, not fear, but something older, heavier, like the weight of knowing too much. As Ethan worked, Atlas circled the cave, his nose twitching along the ground, pausing near a small pile of debris where Avery had found the button. His head tilted, nostrils flaring, paws shifting against the dirt as if the scent told him a story only he understood. Ethan's gaze followed the dog's movement. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the object in Avery's pocket. She hesitated, then fumbled for it, pulling free the worn metallic button, its edges dulled with time, the faint initials JW still visible beneath grime. Ethan's eyes darkened. He took the button, turning it over between his fingers, his jaw tightening with recognition. "James Whitaker," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. "You know him?" Avery asked, voice hoarse from the cold. Everyone in Maple Hollow knows the story. His eyes drifted back to her, sharp and guarded again. He disappeared up here, years ago, never found, and now this shows up in the middle of a snowstorm. The storm outside roared again, battering the cave walls, reminding them both of the dwindling time. "We can't stay here," Ethan said, already helping Avery to her feet. "We've got to move. My vehicle's a ways down the ridge." Avery's legs threatened to buckle, exhaustion pulling at her limbs, but adrenaline pushed her forward as they emerged into the storm, Atlas taking point, his body low and agile as he cut a path through the drifts. The snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in endless white, the trail vanishing beneath their boots faster than they could walk it. The ridge was unrecognizable, every landmark swallowed beneath the blizzard's wrath. Then Atlas stopped. His body stiffened, nose twitching, head tilted toward the tree line. Avery's heart sank. She followed his gaze, barely making out the outline of a cabin tucked beneath towering pines, its roof heavy with snow, faint light flickering through frost-glazed windows. "That's not supposed to be here," Ethan muttered, his voice laced with quiet suspicion, but urgency overrode doubt as they approached. The door creaked open beneath his hand, revealing the dim interior. Flickering firelight, shelves stocked with supplies, blankets folded neatly over the couch. Dust hung in the air, but the place was warm, too warm for something abandoned. Sadie stirred faintly in Avery's arms as they crossed the threshold. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting as she mumbled, "It smells like Christmas." Ethan shut the door behind them, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes scanning the space, the unease never fully leaving his face. But for now, shelter was shelter. Atlas settled near the fire, his sharp gaze never leaving the doorway. Avery collapsed onto the couch, cradling Sadie, her fingers tracing the outline of the button still tucked in her pocket. Somewhere beyond the walls, the storm still raged. But inside this strange house, for the first time all night, warmth returned, and with it a fragile, flickering thread of hope. The old house creaked beneath the weight of the storm, wooden beams groaning softly as wind curled around the eaves. Outside, the snow fell with merciless steadiness, blanketing the ridge in an endless sheet of white. But inside the weathered cabin, warmth flickered in the hearth, casting long shadows across faded wallpaper and time-worn floorboards. Avery Dawson sat curled on the threadbare couch, Sadie resting against her chest, the little girl's color finally returning as sleep claimed her in the glow of the fire. The worn edges of the house whispered of abandonment. Dust clung to forgotten corners, glass panes fogged with age, but the faint aroma of pine, faint traces of wood smoke, and the undeniable warmth spoke of recent presence. Someone had been here not long before them. Ethan Grayson stood near the mantel, his jaw taut, his eyes tracking every corner of the room with quiet suspicion. His hand rested near the radio clipped to his vest, though static filled the line, the storm too heavy for signals to pass. Atlas, the German shepherd, lay nearby, his body coiled tight, amber eyes watching the front door with an intensity that hadn't faded since they arrived. On the mantel sat a framed photograph, its glass cracked, but the face within unmistakable, James Whitaker. The name etched into the button Avery had found, the face plastered across missing posters 5 years ago, the man who had chased the shadows buried in Timberline Ridge and never come down. Ethan's fingers traced the frame's edge, his expression unreadable. "Whitaker's cabin," he muttered under his breath, the words low, like an accusation the walls already knew. Avery's brows furrowed, her voice rasping from exhaustion. "You think he's gone? Or still out there?" Ethan's gaze shifted toward the dusty floorboards, his lips pressed thin with thought. People don't just disappear in these mountains, not without reason. Atlas stirred suddenly, his body stiffening, ears tilting toward the far end of the cabin. His nose twitched, muscles tightening beneath his coat. A faint draft whispered across the floorboards. A seam, hidden beneath an old woven rug, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Ethan peeled the rug back, revealing the outline of a trap door, worn and weathered but intact. The faintest imprint of boot treads dusted the edges, confirming what the air had already whispered. He pulled it open. The stairs descended into shadow, the air colder down there, laced with the damp bite of earth and forgotten time. Atlas led the way, his paws silent against the creaking wood, his body a dark silhouette against the narrow tunnel. Ethan and Avery followed, the faint flicker of a flashlight illuminating shelves stacked with old files, faded photographs, and worn notebooks. At the center of the space stood a heavy wooden desk, papers strewn across its surface, and pinned to the back wall, a sprawling map of timberline ridge, red lines tracing logging roads and hidden trails, circles marking sites of old accidents, the same sites Mercer Mining had quietly buried over the years. Avery's chest tightened, her eyes drifting across newspaper clippings, headlines screaming of missing hikers, suspicious cave-ins, unavoidable natural disasters, all tied together by one constant name, Mercer. James Whitaker's journal lay open on the desk, pages scrawled with notes, names, evidence. He never stopped digging, Ethan murmured, flipping through the entries, his fingers tightening around the pages. He found them out, safety violations, bribes, cover-ups, and they made sure no one ever heard him again. The floorboards overhead groaned, faint but deliberate, the sound of a boot step on aging wood. Atlas's body coiled, his gaze snapping upward, ears rigid. They weren't alone. The front door creaked open, the bitter wind curling down the staircase like a warning. Ethan bolted up the stairs, Atlas tight on his heels, his pulse surging with the weight of instinct. Avery followed, her fists clenched, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the door stood a tall man, snow dusting his dark coat, boots planted wide with false ease, sharp eyes flicking around the cabin's interior like a predator taking stock. Colton Voss. A name whispered in Maple Hollow, former journalist turned corporate fixer, once Whitaker's colleague, now Mercer's loyal shadow. Ethan's stance shifted, his shoulders squaring. "You've got no business here, Voss." Colton's smile barely touched his eyes. "I'm here for what belongs to Mercer. We both know Whitaker got sloppy, kept things he shouldn't have." Atlas's growl rumbled low and dangerous, his body rigid, muscles flexing beneath his coat. "Whatever's down there dies tonight," Colton continued, stepping forward, hand drifting toward the concealed weapon at his belt. "Same as Whitaker." Ethan moved first. Colton lunged, the room exploding in motion. Atlas springing forward with feral precision. Avery pulling Sadie deeper into the corner. Ethan grappling with Colton as the two crashed into the kitchen table, wood splintering beneath their weight. Atlas clamped onto Colton's forearm, teeth sinking deep, dragging the man backward as Ethan delivered a swift elbow to his jaw, sending him sprawling against the floor. Blood stained the cracked linoleum, the fight snarling between raw instinct and cold calculation. Colton's hand darted toward his sidearm, but Avery was already moving, grabbing the cast-iron skillet from the stove and swinging it hard, the metal colliding with bone, staggering him sideways. Ethan tackled him, pinning Colton's arm behind his back, cuffs snapping tight around his wrists as Atlas loomed overhead, jaws bared, eyes burning with warning. The cabin fell still, the storm outside softening to a distant moan, the weight of revelation heavy in the room. Avery's breath shuddered as her gaze drifted to Sadie. the little girl watching wide-eyed but alive, her small hand pressed against Atlas's thick fur for comfort. "I saw that logo, that truck," Sadie whispered, her voice cracking, memory threading through the haze. "The day Dad, the accident." Ethan's expression hardened, the final puzzle piece sliding into place. Mercer hadn't just cut corners. They'd buried the consequences. People like James, like Avery's father, anyone who stood in their way. But tonight, the truth clawed its way back into the light. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere. The first light of dawn bled slowly across Timberline Ridge, turning the snow-covered landscape to shades of blue and gold. The storm had retreated, leaving behind a brittle silence and the heavy aftermath of everything that had unraveled inside the old cabin. But the air was different now, not the suffocating grip of fear, but the lingering hum of uncertainty, of questions not yet answered. Ethan Grayson stood near the front porch, his bruised knuckles raw beneath the bandages, the frost clinging to the edges of his jacket. His gaze drifted across the clearing, the weight of exhaustion pulling at his shoulders, though his posture remained rigid, eyes sharp beneath the morning haze. Colton Voss was secured in the back of a snow-dusted patrol vehicle, wrists cuffed, his jaw bruised, but his expression held no defeat, only the cool calculation of a man still playing angles. His cryptic smirk when the sheriff's deputies hauled him away gnawed at the edges of Ethan's gut like unfinished business. Inside the cabin, Avery sat beside Sadie on the couch, the little girl bundled in layers of blankets, her head resting lightly against her sister's shoulder. The worst had passed, her breathing steady, color returning to her cheeks, but shadows still clung to the room, thick as smoke. Atlas lay near the hearth, muscles taut despite the warmth, his sharp amber eyes never leaving the door, as if sensing the storm wasn't entirely over. Ethan's radio crackled, the static breaking momentarily for the sheriff's voice. "We've got Voss, transporting him down the ridge, but Mercer's legal team is already crawling. Expect backlash." Ethan's jaw tightened. Backlash didn't begin to cover it. Mercer Mining Corp wouldn't roll over because one man was in cuffs. There were layers to peel back, power structures built over decades, and somewhere in that web, the truth could still be buried if they weren't careful. An engine rumbled up the snow-packed trail, tires crunching through ice. A sleek black SUV pulled into the clearing, dark-tinted windows gleaming under the pale sun. Ethan's hand drifted instinctively toward his belt, his eyes narrowing as a man in a pressed wool coat stepped from the vehicle. Tall, silver-haired, his posture too measured, his presence too calm. Gregory Mercer himself. The air thickened, the mountain suddenly too quiet. Mercer approached, leather gloves tucked into his pocket, his gaze sweeping the cabin with casual familiarity. "Mr. Grayson," he greeted coolly, his voice smooth as polished glass. "I understand there's been confusion up here." Ethan's body tensed, his stance widening as Atlas rose, a low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. "You sent your fixer to bury evidence." "He failed," Ethan countered, his voice even but sharp as ice. Mercer's smile never faltered. "You have files, allegations. Nothing sticks without context, and context can be shaped." Avery appeared at the doorway, Sadie gripping her hand, the little girl's wide eyes darting between the two men. Her face paled as recognition flickered, her voice cracking through the tense air. "I saw his logo the day Dad—" Her words stumbled, but they cut through the pretense like glass. Mercer's gaze flicked toward her, the smallest tightening of his jaw betraying the mask. "Children misunderstand," he said softly, patronizing. Ethan stepped forward, voice low with warning. "You underestimated Whitaker. You underestimated me." For a long moment, neither moved, their standoff simmering beneath the brittle morning light. Then Sheriff Bowen's cruiser pulled into view, deputies spilling out, armed and ready, their presence turning the air electric with finality. Mercer's eyes darkened faintly, calculation giving way to resignation, or perhaps temporary retreat. "This isn't finished," he murmured, retreating to his SUV, the tires kicking snow as they rolled away down the ridge. Only when the vehicle disappeared beyond the tree line did the tension uncoil from Ethan's spine. Later, under clearer skies, federal agents arrived, swarming the cabin, combing through the files, sealing the evidence. Whitaker's notes, the maps, the damning links to Mercer Mining. It was all heading to courtrooms far beyond the mountain. But the haven, it stayed. The cabin was restored, not just structurally but in purpose. Locals and volunteers rebuilt it together. Insulated walls, stocked supplies, a safe house for anyone stranded or lost, a shelter carrying the legacy of James Whitaker and those he tried to protect. Ethan remained, his partnership with Atlas officially reinstated, the dog now a quiet guardian of the ridge, his loyalty no longer questioned but revered. Avery found peace among the pines, her grief softening with each visit to the haven. Sadie's health rebounded, her laughter threading through the trees, her connection with Atlas unwavering. One crisp spring morning, they stood together. Avery, Sadie, Ethan, Atlas, their silhouettes framed by melting snow and budding wildflowers. The cabin behind them pulsed with life, the ridge stretching wide and vast, the past no longer a weight, but a foundation. Ethan's hand brushed the porch railing, his eyes drifting to the horizon, voice steady and certain. "We made it." And for the first time, they believed it. They were home.